During the 1980s and 1990s, Reverend Michael Dowd pastored 3 United Church of Christ congregations and worked with religious leaders of many various faiths across America on numerous environmental, peace, and justice issues. And he continues to today. And beginning 6.5 years ago, Michael and his wife, Connie Barlow, who is in her own right an acclaimed science writer, have lived on the road 100% of the time, moving from place to place so that he might share his passion of a sacred view of cosmic, biological, and human evolution. Michael has written a book, Thank God for Evolution, and it is a marvelous book that is highly readable, very enjoyable, and is one of the special treasures of this era. So much so that it has been warmly endorsed and recommended by at least 5 Nobel laureates. Michael's materials, books, and tapes are right outside here following the service, and he is going to be providing a workshop tomorrow evening that not only are you going to want to participate in, but you're going to be calling your friends this afternoon and letting them know that they've got to hear this guy. He has dedicated his life to helping people understand the natural compatibility of science and spirituality, along with the importance for each one of us to reconcile our views on this. Would you join in welcoming Reverend Michael Dowd?
Wow. This is the way to have church. That's what I'm talking about. Wow. Well, it is such an honor and a delight to be here. And, this topic, the gospel according to evolution. I mean, you've got the gospel according to Matthew, the gospel according to Mark, the gospel according to Luke, gospel according to John. And, of course, what we mean by the gospel is the good news. In fact, not just the good news, but the really great news, the kind of news you want to shout from the mountaintops. The news that's so great because it's saving good news. It makes a difference in our lives. And yet, of course, if what we're meaning by the good news doesn't address what people in their own lives are actually experiencing as bad news, well, then they're not going to experience it as good news. They're going to experience it as irrelevant. And so we need to look at first, before we can even talk about what the good news is, what's the bad news that we in fact are dealing with? What's the bad news that we as individuals face? Well, sometimes we face issues of addiction or codependency or relationship issues, or where we run the same habits or the same patterns, the same tendencies that don't serve us or don't serve those around us, or in some way make our life difficult or others' lives difficult. We face bad news in terms of corporations, groups of various sizes, even nation states can be out of integrity. And when we're out of integrity, things don't work. That's bad news. Certainly we're aware of some of the large-scale bad news that we as a species, we as a planet are dealing with, things like global warming, overpopulation, species extinction, the growing gap between the rich and the poor. These are big issues. At all nested levels, we find bad news. And yet, what so oftentimes when people think of what the good news is, they think that, oh, I know what the gospel is. That means if I believe certain things, I get to go somewhere where I die, when I die. And what I'm suggesting, what this gospel of evolution is suggesting, is that the gospel is a whole lot bigger than that. It's a whole lot more meaningful than that. It has a lot of this world relevance in terms of all these levels of challenge and bad news. In fact, I sometimes think about it in terms of, if my house was burning and I couldn't find my 3-year-old daughter, okay? So that's the bad news I'm dealing with. And I'm frantic. My house is burning. I'm just searching all over, and my neighbor, comes. Actually, I'm outside. Here's the thing. I'm outside. I can't even get into the house now. That's the bad news. And my neighbor comes running up to me and says, your daughter's safe by the big oak tree. She's in the back. I'm going to probably fall to my knees, be so grateful, and then go hug my daughter. In other words, I'm going to experience that message as profoundly good news. Switch the scene. If my wife is in critical care in the hospital because she had a car accident, different set of bad news. And my neighbor runs up to me and says, your daughter's safe by the big oak tree. She's in the backyard. Same message, right? But am I going to experience that as message as good news, or am I going to experience it as irrelevant news? Like, get out of my face. What are you talking about? I'm worried about my wife. And I think one of the reasons why so many young people are not exactly flocking to the churches is because what we proclaim when we use the word gospel, when we're talking about the good news, I don't know about you, but most young people I know of aren't sweating bullets about whether they're going to burn for hell in an eternity after they die. And so, what might be some of the things, if God didn't stop revealing truth, vitally human well-being, back when people believed the world was flat and religious insights were recorded on animal skins, what's God revealing today through the entire range of sciences that qualifies as great news? Well, a few things. One is that one of the things that we know for certain is that integrity is the key to our salvation, whether you're talking about our species salvation, our families, our corporations, our nations. Integrity is the key. Now, of course, in biblical times, the way they talked about integrity is being in Christ, because Christ modeled divine integrity. Whether we use traditional religious language or whether we use more secular, modern-day language, we can point to the same fundamental reality when we look at what does it mean to be in Christ? What does it mean to be in deepest integrity? Because that's where we find our salvation. It's not a coincidence that every religious tradition on the planet and the 12-step recovery programs and other recovery programs have the same basic understanding of what it means to be in deepest integrity. Because we all have an unchosen nature. I'll be talking a lot about this tomorrow night. In fact, I've got all kinds of charts and interesting things. But I'll be talking about how we all have an unchosen nature. We have inherited proclivities. We have aspects of ourselves that we didn't choose. We just find ourselves this way because our instincts evolved in a very different world to serve our survival and reproduction needs in a very different world than the world that we today live in. For example, who of us chooses to be attracted to foods that have sugars, salts, and fats? Right, we don't have to choose it. We find ourselves attracted to these things because for 99% of human history, it wasn't easy to find sugar, salts, and fats. So having a craving for these things allowed our ancestors to survive long enough to reproduce. And yet today, it's very easy to find these. It's our unchosen nature. So what I'll be talking about tomorrow night, a lot more examples of this, in terms of testosterone, for example. The higher the testosterone in a person, the more person takes risks, and the more they tend to think about sex. And so this can make sense of a lot of political issues, local here, obviously, and national. In other words, we can make sense, because, again, what the gospel purports to do is say, given human nature, here's good news. And science has a lot to tell us about what human nature is. And the fascinating thing, the absolutely fascinating thing, is it actually validates. It validates and furthers our understanding of traditional concepts like original sin or the fall of Adam and Eve. It doesn't make those wrong in any way. It holds them in a larger context. It shows how deeply wise those concepts were that we can now also speak about in evolutionary ways.